All right, knife guys, here's one that I think you'll like. This is, maybe thinking, what do all these knives have in common? Out of my collection, these are what I would consider to be hard use knives. I don't fancy myself as any kind of operator or anything like that, but it's like, if you had to go somewhere and you had to have something, you know, there's your EDC and there's a knife that, you know, you want it to be dependable, but at the end of the day, if you broke a knife whittling or cutting a piece of rope or, you know, couldn't open your Amazon pack, you know what I mean? It's not that big of a deal. But if you're out camping, if you're out doing something where you needed to rely on this, or maybe if you were in an area where, you know, you don't have good concealed carry laws for firearms, but you are allowed to carry a blade, so you want something, you know, that means business, that could be used for, you know, those types of purposes. You want something you can trust, right? So, you know, if we're going with a fixed blade, out of all my stuff, I'm going to take my Steel Eagle from Tops Knives. This is either 1085 or 1095 high carbon steel. It's 1/4 inch thick stock, amazing heat treat. It's a beefy blade, but this is something you could hack and baton with, and, you know, this is a heavy, serious, you know, type of survival knife. When it comes to folders, you know, you can spend a lot of money, or you can spend not so much, or you can spend a little bit of money, and that's what we're going to go through. But out of what I've got, you know, I've got my SOG Kiku XR, which is, again, just built like a freaking tank. I think it's CTS HXP steel, cryo-treated, very thick stock, really, really heavy-duty stainless liners, ball-bearing pivot, just really sweet action. That is EDC size, but that is a serious, like, that's a heavy-use knife, right? I think those are like 180 bucks. If you want to spend around 100-ish, you've got, or maybe it's a little more, but it's not much, just around the $100 mark. You got your Victorinox Hunter A-locks. This I would consider a pretty heavy-duty knife. It's got a nice, strong back lock, decent blade stock, but it's also, again, important for the handle and, you know, something that could take a little bit of abuse. You've got stainless steel liners of a, you know, significant thickness with then thick hard anodized aluminum over the steel. That I would consider a fairly hard use knife. Here is my Steel Will Original Apostate. That is S35VN, heavy, thick, it's not heavy weight, but heavy duty, thick titanium, G10 on this side. This is a pretty heavy duty knife. Very strong frame lock, really kind of overbuilt for what it is. Bit big for EDC, but I would consider that a heavy-ish duty knife. And then you got the Mac Daddy here, the Medford Praetorian. Not a clone. This is actually from Greg Medford. Ordered it right from their website. And this is a $450 knife for G10 and D2, which might seem a lot to some people, but if you had to fight to hell and back and you needed a folding knife that was, it's big for EDC, but you could carry it in your pocket, that's the knife you're gonna want. For a pocket, super heavy duty, you could baton this. I mean, you could do some serious work with a knife like that. Well, what if you don't want to spend $450? What if you don't want to spend $200? What if you don't want to spend $180 or even $110? Can you get a beefy, strong, serious duty knife that's well made and would hold up to some serious abuse? The answer is I think so. It is a Chinese knife. However, this is not a clone of any kind. This is a collaboration with a man by the name of Dirk Pinkerton, who is a legit, custom, well-respected knife designer. This comes in a couple different flavors. This is called the Proponent. This is the Amazon edition. I believe it's exclusive to Amazon, so it's all black. It's D2, or I think it might be their ARP9. We'll find out. It's probably on the blade here somewhere. No, this is actually D2, so same steel as Greg's using. Now, I'm going to say, well, the difference between the grade of steel Greg uses versus his heat treat, yeah, you're right. But $56, $450. It's a big price difference. You're talking 9 times the price. So, what are you getting? Well, you're getting G10 over steel liners. Here, you're getting G10 on one side over steel liners. So it's not on both sides. We'll just say G10 over steel liners. Over here, you're getting a flipper that actually has decent action because it is on ball bearing pivots. So no blade wobble, but it actually, even though it's a big heavy blade, you actually can flick it. Here you've got a D2 steel blade on washers that requires you to snap it. You can open it one-handed like that, and maybe that's enough. Maybe it doesn't have to have that fast deployment. I don't think that that's all that critical, other than it makes it easier to fidget with. But when it comes to actually using the knife that means business, the washers are fine. And who knows, maybe for durability, those are even better. So what do you get? You get a massive Wharncliff blade with a pretty stout point that is ridiculously like pinprick stabby. Very, very nice. Very nice contoured handle, much like the G10 on there. The grip here is, even though that looks like it's more of a texture, it's about as grippy. You've got jimping up here. You've got some sort of cutout jimping right there. You've got your steel standoffs. This one has a glass breaker. This one does not. This one has a heavy duty pocket clip. Nice tension. About the same as that. Both of them are about as deep carry as the other. This has a nice groove there to really kind of lock your hand in. So does this. You've got beautiful pivot collar, anodized in red, really kind of sets it off nice. This is all heavy duty stuff. That's machined nice. The G10 is machined nice. These are fairly big screws. The standoffs are big. This is a knife that means business too. Now the blade's going to be a wee bit, well, you know what? It looks shorter, but it actually isn't. It's because it's so much shorter here, but the blade itself is about the same length. You get a tiny bit more cutting because this is in a straight line, and here you have a line, then you got the diagonal. So technically that is a little bit longer, but you put these up against each other, these are about identical in size. They're very close in weight. I will say this one is a little bit heavier than the Medford, believe it or not, but that's because it's got two steel liners. I think if this one had the other steel liner instead of just G10 on the one side. Now, does that mean this is stronger because it's got steel on both sides? Theoretically. I don't know if it'll ever be enough to make a difference, but that is where this one does feel like it's about an ounce heavier. The blade is just as thick. It's almost as much metal in the blade, but this one has an extra layer. Now, I will say that the locking bar on the frame lock here, on the liner lock, is a little thicker here. So you might say, well, this one's a lot thicker, so that will take more pressure to break. I've seen people say, these things, flame locks and whatchamacallit locks don't seem to hold as much weight as a back lock or one of these. Well, here's something that none of these expensive knives have. You got a lanyard that you can loop around back through there. Let me show you what this is. You see this hole right here? On the end of the lanyard is a screw. Steel. You screw that in, you now have a fixed blade. That blade, and it doesn't even have any wiggle because that thing's very tight fit. You can have that on a lanyard that hangs there. Let's just imagine that was tied in there. You now have a knife that is a fixed blade. You've got steel on both sides. You've got massive pivot anchoring it there with some pretty heavy duty hardware. And now you've got that screw going through the steel of the blade, which is almost a 1/4 inch. I mean, maybe not that much, but it's as thick as the Medford. That is in fact, it might even be a tiny bit thicker. I have to get out the calipers, but it's about, let's just say it's about the same thickness as the Medford. That is going through both scales of G10, through both steel liners, and through the blade and screwing into the other side. That is now a fixed blade. If you were going to be batoning, splitting firewood, into kindling and doing some serious stuff, you put that in so that you're not putting that pressure on the lock. Mr. Pinkerton did a hell of a design coming up with a knife that I think you could, would it be as robust as this if you really beat the piss out of it? I don't know. But I'm looking at these materials. I'm looking at comparable steels. I'm looking at G10. I'm looking at the fact of, looking at the size of the pivot. I'm looking at the fact of This one has 2 steel liners instead of just one, and they're on both sides. So, you know, this is incredibly strong. But I would have to think that's got to be at least as strong. You've got a really nice stabbing point. You've got a good point. You've got your jimping. I mean, they're not copying. I don't think Dirk Pinkerton, knowing his reputation, wasn't trying to copy anything. But there are similarities. I will say the jimping here is more abrasive on the thumb. It's not sharp enough to cut you, but it's not that comfortable. Here, that's some big-ass jimping, but it's not enough to cut you or anything like that. This is good. This is usable. And when you screw that in, you now have essentially a fixed blade. That is impressive as hell. Shaving sharp. Wicked sharp, out of the box. Push cut, effortless. Absolutely effortless. That is a just wicked, wicked, wicked sharp blade. And that is some serious thickness. It's got a nice PVD coating. Maybe made in China, but it's not a knockoff. I like that fuller in there. Blood groove, whatever they call it. And it's all blacked out other than that little red just to give it a little bit of pop. That is a cool knife. This is the Artisan Cutlery Proponent. You can get it on Amazon. I'll throw a link up there. It's got... Now, one thing I don't know why it has is you've got these thumb studs. I mean, well, I guess it opens either way. I'm a fan of do one or the other. If you're going to have the flipper, so then you got the finger guard there, that makes sense to me. Then get rid of this, because as I'm thinking, if you're cutting through something, depending on what you're cutting through, or if you were batoning and splitting firewood, you'd have to do most of the work out here, because as you cut up, you're going to hit those. However, you get 2 screwdrivers, those are removable. So I could probably just remove that and take that off, and I might actually do that because I don't really need that. There's just one extra thing to catch on something. I know some people like it, and it certainly works. I mean, it flicks open without having to snap it. Very nice. In fact, it does it a little bit nicer than the flipper. It gives a little bit of sweeter action. But I think the flipper makes more sense because then you got that extra finger guard to where if you were using this really heavy duty, your hand is locked in, and that makes it very unlikely that you're going to slide up and over the blade. More so than here. I mean, your hand locks in, but that's more ramped instead of like 90-degree angle. So your hand is, it's a lot of guard, but your hand is more likely to creep up and slide over as opposed to slamming into that and that jimping on that face. Now, am I going to sit here and tell you that this knife is better than the Medford or even just as good? No, I don't know that it is. But I'll tell you this, when it comes to, you know, maybe warranty and service and all that, yeah, go with the Medford. But if you don't have $450 to spend on a tank of a knife, but you want a tank of a knife that frankly uses the same steel, and I know people say, well, it's American D2 versus Chinese D2. I've seen too many reputable, very popular knife review sites send Artisan and Civivi and WE and some of these other Chinese brands, especially I've seen with these guys, send it off to a lab to be analyzed for metallurgy and hardness. And they're coming back within the specs that they're advertised. I know people say, oh, it's Chinese D2. You know what? You could say that, but you know, unless all the knife review sites and the testing labs are all somehow, you know, conspiring, you know, maybe they're with the same conspiracy, working with NASA to make everybody believe that the world is round, you know, but they come back and they test really well. They test as legit. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, you should get this over the Medford. But again, not everyone can afford to spend. This is the cheap Medford. This is the D2 version. The other ones are $600 to $800 or $900, depending if you want titanium and what kind of finish you want and all that kind of crap. Not everyone's going to spend that much money. I mean, that's a car payment. It's like a decent car payment to spend $600, $700, $800 on a knife. But you want something that if you had to take somewhere and throw in your backpack and shit hit the fan and or you're going camping and you want a knife that, you know, you don't want to necessarily carry around the straight knife, although I think you probably should. But if you didn't want to, and you wanted something that, you know, while big, did fit in the pocket, that if you had to open it up and use it for something serious, it isn't going to snap on you like a little Swiss Army knife or, you know, a bug out, which is a fantastic EDC knife, but I wouldn't consider that a hard use. If you had to do something and pry something, well, you got to snap that handle. There's no way, you know, it's going to hold up the way this is or this. But you are in the same size, you're in the same weight, you're using similar materials and similar construction. And if the shit really hit the fan and you basically you found yourself in need of a fixed blade, keep your lanyard handy, screw that in, you can unlock it. That blade isn't wiggling, it ain't going anywhere. So now you've got the blade supported not just by the lock, but a 1/4-inch bar of steel going through all the G10 and the steel blade and the steel liners. That ain't going anywhere. You're not going to snap off the G10. You could conceivably beat the shit out of this. This side would probably hold up well because of that steel liner. But you could break that on this side on the G10. It's just G10. And I know it's incredibly tough stuff, but I don't know, get it out in the cold and try to baton with it or something like that. Would it hold up? I don't know, but that's why this knife is only $450 instead of the full titanium version that probably would take that extra level of abuse. Shipped from Amazon to your door within 48 hours for less than $60, and it's using similar materials, and it's built, again, within reason, similarly for anything but the most absolute craziest, extreme, unlikely situation you'd ever get into. I wouldn't feel outgunned, outknifed going into that situation with something like this or any of these on the table. I don't think this one's going to be as strong, but that's also nice and thin and probably a better slicer, you know. But it's also, you can get 4 of these for the price of 1 of those. You can get 2 of these for the price of 1 of those. You can get 2 of these and have change left over. This one, you could buy 8 or 9 of these. And did I do my math right? Yeah, at least 8. Yeah, it's rounded up to $60 times 8 is what, $480. So this one with tax and shipping and stuff came to like $480 or just under $500. Yeah, you're basically looking at 8 times the cost, give or take a couple pennies. That is the Dirk Pinkerton completely blacked out edition of the Proponent from Artisan Cutlery. And wow, does that does not disappoint. I don't know if I would ever use it because I don't tend to have lanyards, but I guess if I was going into that situation and I grabbed this knife, of course I'm going to grab this one just because I paid extra money for that one. But, you know, if I had to grab this one, you know, if I was going to go in that situation, I probably would grab that. But that is just, that point, man. Talk about draw cuts, stabbing, puncturing. A Wharncliff blade of that magnitude is just some serious, serious cutting power. So good job, Artisan. I don't know how the shit you do this for $60, but I'm glad that you do. So 2 thumbs up. I'll put a link in the description.